All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of David's Saturday Night Sit Back. Tonight, I am honored and grateful to have Senior Chief Eric Lundquist sitting across from me. He is currently the Chief Operating Officer of Method Endeavors. He's a business coach, and he is a retired Navy SEAL. Eric, as part of the BUD/S graduating class of 207 in 1996, as a Special Operations Combat Medic in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and he went on to SEAL Team 3 after multiple tours in the Middle East. He went back to BUD/S as the lead petty officer for the second phase, the dive phase. Following his instructor tour, he moved to the East Coast where he served multiple commands, including SEAL Team 2. He's deployed multiple times to Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Yemen, and other combat locations. He has served as the leading chief and operations officer for large special ops teams in Iraq, Afghanistan, tracking down and capturing or killing Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Iranian terrorist networks. His team had an integral role in locating and negotiating the recovery of U.S. Army soldier Bo Berdahl. He conducted over 200 combat operations in the Middle East, and through his innovation, helped capture high-value terrorists in the Horn of Africa. As part of the steering committee on the Minnesota's Military Appreciation Fund, he helped promote programs that granted over $11 million to 18,000 plus recipients to date. Eric was also an operations officer for 3 months doing highly complex Ukraine personnel extraction. That was in 2022. And it led to, I butchered my notes, I apologize, everyone. The operation led to the safe passage of 104 men, women, and children from Ukraine 24 hours and following after the invasion by Russia. Eric, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to your episode of DSNSB.
Awesome, man. Thanks.
That was you've done a lot. So when you hear like 25 plus years of stuff packed into 45 seconds, what sort of goes through your head?
What's the next 25 years like?
Heck yeah. I love it. I love it. Cool. Well, if we can just go back to the early days. So you grew up in Bloomington, Minnesota, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So Bloomington, Minnesota, south of Minneapolis, sort of well known now for the Mall of America, which is on the property of where our Met Stadium used to be, where the Twins used to play. I had like this massive like fortune of having one of my best friends was his dad was he's a silver bat winning, gold glove bat winning player for the Minnesota Twins and became a batting coach. So I got the chance to like be on the field, meet the team, like wrestle around with some of these guys. Even in 1987 when they first won the World Series, I had like an awesome childhood.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. So Bloomington, and did you have any siblings growing up? Only child? What was the family?
No, I had an older brother who used to kick my ass.
How much older?
4 years.
4 years? There's a gap between me and my brother, and he kicked my ass a lot too. Yeah. Darn those older brothers.
It changed in our 20s.
There you go. What's his name?
Russ.
Shout out to Russ.
Shout out to Russ. I love you, brother.
Is he still in Minnesota, or where's he at these
days?
He
is, yeah. So he works on the Minnesota Vikings training compound. He's got like kind of a dream job. He's like the head of maintenance there, and I mean, we love the team. We're diehard fans, so he just loves it.
There you go. And do you guys still keep in touch, even though there's a little bit of distance between y'all now?
Oh, we always have, yeah.
That's awesome. Good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a brother in Oregon, a sister in New York, 2 other sisters in California, and I feel like given technology these days and just the ability to jump on a plane that's only a couple hours right away, it's not hard to stay in touch these days. So cool.
You make me feel guilty for not going up there more often.
Oh, I'm sorry. That wasn't my intention. Do you try to make it home very often, or what does that look like for you?
Yeah, this summer I went home a couple of times, just weddings and family events and stuff like that. So
nice.
Yeah,
there you go.
It's good.
What about like Thanksgiving and Christmas being on the horizon? Do you think you'll stay here or do some traveling?
Well, I have my own kids, so they'll all probably converge into San Antonio.
Okay.
Yeah.
How old are your kids right now?
19. So I have 4 of them. So like my original answer would be I have no idea.
Sure.
But 19, 21, 24, 26.
And are they all in San Antonio, or where are they at these days?
I got 2 in San Antonio, 1 at Waco at school, and 1 in Colorado Springs.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's chilly there, right?
Well, it's like 8,000 feet, so it depends on your version of chilly.
Anything with snow?
Yes.
Okay. My company sent us to Minneapolis back in 2017 for a new hire training, and the training started on, I think it was January 3rd, and I was.
That's not chilly, dude. That's Kelvin, bro. Like, that's cold.
It was yes, to a California boy, or really anyone, I guess. Yeah, I looked at the low when we were there, if memory serves me right, was -3 with the high being 26. And I just thought, what? You guys, you're sending all your California employees there?
You should feel fortunate. 26 is when, if it's 26 at the end of February, early March, which is pretty typical, that's when we break our shorts out.
Interesting.
Because you're like used to 10, 15 below with wind. So 26 is like, well, this is warm.
Huh. It's funny how it's all relative. You know, to me, like, everyone told me, oh, your first summer in Texas is going to be horrible and it'll probably drive you out of here and you're going to hate it. And, like, sure, it got hot, but it's the same in Northern California, too. So the summer, these last 4 months, didn't faze me at all. Yeah. But cold weather is not my thing.
Yeah.
There's negative degrees. I don't do those. So your family had a pool as early when you were as early as 4 years old. So you've been swimming for quite some time.
Yeah, actually, it was my brother that just kind of tossed me in. I had to learn.
Any lessons or all just self-taught?
Yeah. So I don't even know. I don't remember my desire to do this, but right around 5 years old, I was on like a YMCA swim team. I did that for probably a few years. And so it's mostly freestyle, relay races kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's the only formal swim training I ever had. So real young kid.
Did you enjoy it?
I don't even remember. I must not have because I stopped.
Sure.
Right. And then when I saw the guys on the swim team in high school and I was in football and I was a pole vaulter, which is like the laziest crew in the track team. This swimming didn't appeal to me. Going to school at 5 a.m. and staying until 5 p.m. Like I'd rather go to school at normal time and then spend 4 hours in practice after instead.
Yeah, yeah. Those early morning swimmers, you and me are.
It's a culture, man.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you played football was your main sport that you played throughout grade school and high school. Did you play until your senior year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were there ever any plans to play in college or?
I did. Yeah. So I was going to this school in Bemidji, Minnesota, until my plans just kind of changed and I ended up in Bible college. Were
you raised religiously?
Not by my parents, but they encouraged us to go to church, and some friends of my brother, they kind of forced me to go, but it was a great thing. Like I ended up just making lifelong friends that I still talk to today every week.
That's awesome. Every week.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Over text, call, how do you keep in touch?
Yeah. My friend Ryan and I, we talk all the time.
That's
so,
awesome.
I mean, a couple times a week. I'm going hunting with him in Minnesota. I'll be back in Minnesota in November. So, yeah.
What are you going to be hunting for?
White-tailed deer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So it's up there.
Nice. So did your parents go with you to church or was it you just going with your friends?
Yeah, sometimes, but it was more of a youth group kind of thing. So like Wednesdays. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so you graduate high school and why do you think you went to a Bible school first versus going to whatever the community college was or whatever UC was in the area?
Yeah, I would say sort of peer pressure, sort of just kind of led to go there. And as we get through this podcast, you'll understand like how it tied together even to some things that we were doing in Ukraine. It's pretty crazy.
Okay. Yeah. And then what do you recall the year that you were there? Did you have a major declared or were you just working through the general education requirements?
Yeah, gen ed. In fact, the school was so small, it wasn't even accredited. So it was full on, like kind of just like full-time Sunday school.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the students that stay and finish, what do they graduate with? Is it a degree or like a license?
No, yeah, it would just be like a 2-year degree, sort of generals, and then there's plenty of other like Bible colleges around there that would take it, and then they go do like normal degrees from there.
Business or economics or
Yep.
whatever the thing is.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And then after a year, what did you realize that made you us pivot from being in Bible college to going to the Navy instead?
So that's a really cool story, actually. So I was working as a waiter at a restaurant as many hours as I could kind of squeeze in with homework and things. And I was probably a B or C student, and at one point visiting my dad, because it was just a 45-minute drive, so sometimes if I just wanted to hang out at home, I'd go home for a weekend. He just kind of told me, he's like, hey, I'm not footing the bill for this next year, so you're on your own. And I thought, well, how am I going to afford this and work and like maintain grades? And I just didn't see that happening. And internally, my mind sort of opened up to the idea of like, I got to find something else. And I don't even remember how, but I came across a book about SEALs and I started reading it, and I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I became pretty determined to do that. But being at Bible college, I thought, well, God, if this is what you want me to do, I need some kind of sign, because this is a pretty drastic trajectory change for me. And so I remember thinking about that in that manner one night, and the next morning all the students gather in this building for like daily announcements, a prayer, and a hymn. And the hymn that we sang was Holy, Holy, Holy. And somewhere in the second or the third verse, there's a line that says, I will praise thee from earth and sky and sea. And so SEAL stands for sea, air, land. And I took that as a calling and a tap on my shoulder, and haven't looked back.
So I saw that in your speech, and the way you presented it, it was almost like it was sort of a half joke, half serious, but you actually, sounds like it was a pretty serious moment for you. You guys sang that hymn and you thought, okay, let's do this.
I probably kind of laugh at it just because to me, it's sort of like, and whatever that you believe, but you could call it manifestation, predestination, or, God just like doing his thing and like, you wanted a sign. I mean, here you go, So it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I try to keep my eye open for those things. And some people might say it's purely coincidence that song was saying and nothing more than that. And then other people like you and myself sometimes see these little signs in the road, and we are okay with following them and seeing what happens.
Yeah, and I mean, scientifically, once you have your mind sort of made up on something, you sort of kick in this reticular activating system. So yes. Like you start becoming more and more aware of those signs and clues.
So I know I have my pitch on what the reticular activating system is, but for the listeners who may have never heard this term before, what is that system? How would you describe it? Yeah,
so basically, when we didn't live in cushy air conditioning and heated areas, your brain would, when it first would encounter danger or pleasure or these things, you just don't have the capacity to focus on everything all the time. So it sort of logged these things as important, whether it's emotionally or, for survival reasons. And so your brain is in tune to recognize those things, particularly when it's danger, to keep you alive. And so the translation today is, if you see a car and you're like, oh, I really like that car and I want that car, and then you buy that car, all of a sudden you're like, well, everybody owns this car. Like, it's everywhere, because your brain now recognizes it. So, for ladies, it might be a dress. You're like, dang it, she's got the same dress. So your brain just is in tune, and it's sort of like top of mind or the back of your mind, and you're recognizing those patterns.
Have you ever heard it compared to why people keep a gratitude list or they journal in the morning? Because then if your brain knows that every morning you need to write down 3 things to be grateful for, the RAS will automatically just start identifying those things throughout the day. And then that way you have your answers as soon as you wake up. But also in general, you're just spending now more time being grateful instead of focusing on things that maybe piss you off or get you impatient or things like that. And so there actually is this like, it's not just like this thing to flex about like, oh, I keep my gratitude exercise in the morning, but no, there's like actually a reason to do this thing because you're helping out your own brain thinking about healthier things.
100%. Actually, so, over the years, I've gone back and forth into the Bible, and there's one thing that I've come up with, and I've tried to like instill in my kids is that just from those lessons that like the key to longevity is thankfulness. And so recently, I think it's 2016, UCLA published a paper in a medical journal talking about those that practice routine gratitude through their study. They found reduce their cortisol levels by 21%. So all you gotta do is thankful for stuff, and like, and sort of what I tell people is the number 1 and number 2 killer in the United States is heart disease and cancer. The number 1 contributor to both of those is stress. So literally all you gotta do is be thankful for everything, and you're reducing your chances of heart attack and cancer by a significant amount of percentage.
There you go. 21%. I'll have to look that up. I love reading those kinds of studies and nerd out over those numbers. I'll have to try to hunt that one down. But to not stray too far off course here, going back to so Bible school, you join the Navy. Is Buds first, or what does that transition look like into the Navy?
Yeah, so I ended up, once I got that sign, I called a recruiter from a payphone. I was doing Cloak and Dagger even right from the beginning. And I said, hey, I want to go in the Navy. I want to be a SEAL. They're like, yeah, come on in. Well, what's your phone number? Like, tell us. No, I'll call you back in 2 weeks. So I hung up. I did that 3 more times until they finally recognized like it's me calling. And they're like, yeah, we got a contract. You sign it. We can guarantee you get to San Diego, but the rest is on you. Like, we can't guarantee you to be a SEAL. Like, you have to pass all this stuff. And I knew that already. So I went in, and they had a contract at the time for medics. And so I ended up going to boot camp, and it wasn't until I got to boot camp that I found out my contract meant that I'm going to be a medic. And from boot camp, I went to San Diego to Buds.
Why do you think you made those 3 calls? Was there some sort of apprehension or nervousness about officially signing on the line?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did they even know your name and like exactly who you were that third time you called, or they just recognized the voice and they're like, all right, kid.
I don't remember if I even told them my name. I don't remember. It could have been.
Sure. Was there any big culture shocks going from Bible school to, in the sense of, obviously, we'll get into Buds training in a second. So that in and of itself is going to be a huge shock for anyone. But I guess more of like, being that you're raised in a somewhat religious household, either like the cursing or porn or just being like, and like you're all of a sudden immersed in just like you're in San Diego with a bunch of other dudes who are all now chasing this common thing of not dropping out of Buds. Was there, outside of the physical portion of the training, was there any cultural shocks that you remember?
No, I mean, look, I didn't grow up as a perfect teenager. Like I had exposure to porn, but because I probably didn't live in that kind of community, right? So, no real culture shock for me. In fact, like, if I were to say, other than like whether there is a God or not, the rest of the like sort of fundamentally conservative values were pretty like overlaid with the military as a whole, right? And the people that I was around. So
as far as Buds training, then how was that experience?
Oh man, I mean, amazing, awesome, horrible. But like having the fortune of being on the other side as an instructor was like incredible, frankly. Sometimes I remember looking at students going like, dude, I don't know why you're doing this. Like, this is awful, dude. Like, you should quit.
What what is it about those students that you identify that and have that reaction?
I don't know. I think I just have this compassion. I hate people. I hate seeing people suffer sometimes.
And so there's some students who are suffering versus the ones who are going to make it are maybe not thriving, but they can, maybe there's something more tenacious about them, or.
Yeah, probably. In fact, like there was a study when I was a student there. We had to take all these like sort of short form psych tests. And I mean, as a student, I didn't know what they were doing. I just thought it was a part of the Navy's process to make sure we weren't crazy. But what I found out later as an instructor, that the Navy had hired, I think it's Stanford's psychology department. So the Navy's challenge at the time, and remember I had a special contract to go from boot camp to BUDS. The majority of students at BUDS were coming from the Navy's fleet. The challenge that the Navy had and that the SEAL teams had was the Navy on one hand would move all of these people, including sometimes their families, to San Diego from all different parts of the globe. So that was expensive. Mm-hmm. And then the training itself has this massive attrition from 70 to 80%. So that means those sailors now had to be redistributed among the fleet and many times moved back to wherever, some other part of the globe. So it's expensive. The SEAL teams had a challenge, and sometimes they would have, a sailor come in as a brand new SEAL, but their rank was usually in a position of some kind of power, including like maybe what we call like a team leader who's in charge of 4 or 5 guys. And now in a firefight, they're supposed to be making calls, but they've never done it before. Mm-hmm. So they weren't raised in this community. They weren't raised and trained. They might have been a welder on a ship. So they have no idea how to really be in that leadership position yet. Mm-hmm. And so the Navy found it after this study by Stanford, which I'll come back around to, that it's just better just to take them off the street. So eventually, among a lot of other decision processes, but so now all the students that end up at BUDS basically come from the street through boot camp to training. But what was it about the students that made it? That's like the interesting question at the time. And I think it was like some 6 or 7 years. By the time I was a instructor, I remember the skipper he would always give a speech during the graduations. And so part of his speech was, he would go over all these crazy numbers about how like thousands of push-ups, and he had like a really specific number. So he had done some data.
You want me to read them off for you?
Do you have it?
I do.
Where did you get it?
That speech.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, so they might be a year old. This is a year old, everyone, but the data at the time was 5,780 push-ups, 5,500 sit-ups, 75 miles of running, 55 miles rowing in a small rubber boat, 8 miles of low crawl, and 14 hours of sitting static in 60-degree ocean water.
Yeah, so he would talk about that, and these numbers sound crazy, but you're like, over 6 months, it's no big deal. But then he would say, well, that's just how weak. And so then he would go on to his speech and say, well, what is it about these kids that are, I say kids now because I'm older, but about these men that are standing here at graduation. And at the time, Stanford didn't have any conclusions. So they studied all kinds of aspects of our lives. So they found that no race, religion, creed, socioeconomic status, family makeup were anything correlative to the students that were sitting there at graduation. Their conclusion at the time was they just wanted to be there. So like super impact. So is it tenacity? Yeah. Is it the ability to endure like awful situations? Yeah. So I don't know what the Navy committed in the endowment on this thing, but they gave them more money and more years to figure this out. And so they turned away from trying to study all of the kids going to BUDS, and they turned to the veterans and asked them some survey questions. I never was a part of that for some reason, deployed or whatever. But by the time I was in so I had gone finished my few years left in the Navy in a recruiting role. And it was sort of like, hey, you're mentors to these candidates that are coming in, and here are the things that we kind of want you as a guideline to mentor them on. And they were in part from the final portion of this study. So what they found was, after asking these veteran SEALs was, and guys that were still in, I mean, veteran, like they're not students anymore, was that they all do the same 4 things. I don't know how they came up with 4 things. I'm sure they had a myriad of things, but they're like, a large percentage of them all are doing these same 4 things. And it's really interesting. I mean, I could go on about each of these, but so the first thing, and these are just solid life lessons. And I've taught these kids that were coming into the Navy. They still reach out to me today, and it's sort of a guide on their lives. But the first thing is, believe it or not, just goal setting, right? But what is it that we do differently? So we have this, going into training, we have this massive goal. When you're 21, 6 months of just all of that stuff that you just talked about sounds like a really long time. Right. So you have this really large goal that seems really far away. And there are times where you have to figure out, particularly during Hell Week, I just need to get to lunch. Like, our meals in Hell Week are like the thing to look forward to. One, like, for about 30 minutes, you're not really messed with. So you just eat, and as long as you don't fall asleep, like, you're good. And it's warm. And so, yeah, so sometimes you just break that large goal down into really small chunks. And when you look at what that really means and how that translates to sort of the real world, it's a SMART goal. Mm-hmm. So SMART being an acrostic for that it's specific, and it's measurable. So I'm going to do exactly this many times, or whatever that might be, whatever that metric is, that it's achievable. It's not crazy. And something my dad told me, which was really awesome, before I left for the Navy, he probably sensed, or somehow we got in the conversation like, well, I think I'm going to make it. I don't know. I mean, I could break my leg and it never happened. And he said something. He's like, other people have done it. So why can't you? So it's achievable. So you got specific, measurable, achievable, that it's relevant to whatever it is you're doing. Then you put a time constraint on it. So that's a SMART goal if you're not familiar with that.
What's interesting about that is I don't know, a guy who is he's part of Alcoholics Anonymous now, another guy who is addicted to heroin, and he's now 6 years sober from it. And in Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a similar mantra of 1 day at a time. Because if I was to say, okay, I'm never going to use heroin again, ever, until the day I die, I'm almost setting myself up for failure. Like, I'm young and I got probably at least 20, 30 years left in me, but if I just say, okay, today only, Wednesday, I'm not going to use heroin. I only got 12 hours left in the day. I got to work for a couple hours, go to the gym, go to a meeting. So it's interesting that you have, Navy SEALs, BUDS training, and then people in AA, NA, even my own life sometimes. It's just like, just get through today, or get through whatever, the next episode, the next meeting, whatever the thing may be. I love that one because it's applicable to almost any human. If you're feeling overwhelmed, well, let's break this down a little bit and shorten the goal to something achievable.
Right. And when we look at successful people or companies that are doing well, it looks like overnight, but it's not. It's all those little steps that they had to take to get to where they're at. Yeah. So, to sort of capitalize on some of that. So what the SMART goal does in developing those goals, it sort of initiates this prefrontal cortex in your brain that allows you to be with your RAS much more receptive and aware of opportunities that pop up. So the second thing that we all do is we take a belief system and those goals and create a mantra, so that the mantra is something that's constantly rolling through our brain. And doing that allows that prefrontal cortex to just recognize opportunities. And again, so some people can say it's manifestation, or it just might be your awareness that you're finding it. If you're ever somewhere, if you're overseas and everybody's speaking another language and you hear English with an accent from where you grew up in the States, you're going to hear it behind you at a restaurant. It's that same kind of thing. So you're recognizing these opportunities that come before you. And then at that point, it's just taking action. So that mantra is the second thing that we do. The third thing is super interesting, and a lot of studies have been done on, but it's just visualization. So it's visualizing yourself after that long drawn out goal in the future has been achieved. So you're literally like daydreaming yourself in that role already. So something that was really helpful to me was there was a recruiting video for SEALs. It was this cheesiest thing you could imagine. Like the directing was awful. It was total B flick, but it had this music that was also cheesy, but I would always like have that music in my head and picture myself on this like fake mission that was a part of this video, like throughout training. And then during difficult times is just like reciting some mantra about what I'm going to do in the next week or whatever. And that's kind of how it all just kind of kept rolling. The other thing, the fourth thing that they talked about, that we talk about, that they came up with, is breathing. So something we do to sort of control all of our physiological arousals, and I don't mean that in a weird way, but anger, fear, reluctance, and everything is like sort of slow inhale, slow exhale. So if you've ever had a kid, or you see a kid crying and like they're sobbing and they're barely breathing, it's like, stop, take a deep breath. Why do we instinctively know to say that to a kid who's having a fit? It's because that breath alone, it's another thing that reduces cortisol like instantly. So yeah, those are the four things. After years of like teaching that and going through that, I got into real estate investing, and I came across a book, and I was absolutely shocked that the Navy spent over $1 million with Stanford's psychology department, because they could have just spent $17 on Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. It's the same stuff. So it's just success mindset.
Yeah. One of the front desk guys at the gym I go to was just telling me today that he's a little bit stressed out because he has one job. He starts a second one in November. Sorry, I completely forgot what month we were in for a moment. And he's 2 months behind on rent, and just sort of stressing out about all this stuff. And maybe I'll just ask him, like, have you visualized yourself like in that second job, caught up on rent? Mm-hmm. Because I do think that there's definitely something going on there with visual. I've done that to start this podcast or for other goals, just envisioning yourself. And once you do it a couple dozen times, it starts to become like more tangible and real.
Yeah. And I think all of it like rolled into one, and there's some other things that are in the book. It's just a matter of then you're not allowed any other options but to do the things that you need to do to get to your goal. And the way you develop the verbiage and the goal, some people fail with that. Like, well, I want to be a millionaire by whatever. Well, if you say want, you're leaving room in your brain to not do it. If you say I will be, there's no room. So you have to do these things.
Make a commitment.
Yep.
Yeah. It's scary. I'm getting better at it.
Good.
So to go back to Buds, from once you finish Hell Week to when you're graduating, do you recall about what that duration of time is, give or take?
Well, roughly 4.5 months, 5 months.
Okay.
Yeah, Hell Week's like, at the time, it was like the 5th week of training. So.
And then you graduated, and what does life look like after that? Were you deployed somewhere pretty quick? Did you have some downtime?
No, actually, like in terms of like the rest of the guys in my class, I was behind. There's a handful of us that went to Fort Bragg in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Special Operations Command had established a formalized medic training for special operations medics. It was originally designed for the Army's Green Berets medics, so something they call an 18 Delta, which is just a classification number that they use for their special forces guys. So it's, at that time, this became joint, so you have all these services that are going through. So I went through like a 7-month program that was massively fast. In like 5 short months, we're nationally registered paramedics. The next month, we're in New York City in hospitals and ambulance rigs, like doing clinical rotations in like pretty crazy environments. Relative, right? So,
Right.
well, except for I did labor and delivery for 4 days and well, in fact, like we end up doing medical clinics overseas, and we sometimes we see things with families. It's not just helping wounded in firefights or anything, but a lot of times we do humanitarian work also. Not without some kind of like plan to ask for something later, but yeah, so that's kind of what we do. So that's where I was, Fort Bragg. Super glad I did it. I sort of didn't want to do that. But there was a time when my youngest daughter was learning to walk and sort of standing and scooting along the couch. She started slapping my knee. So she was about 9 months. And I looked down at her. I remember I was watching the news. I looked down at her and I'm like, "You're choking." I waited a sec and I could tell her face started turning red. I flipped her over. I gave her 2 black blows and she spit out a Hershey's Kiss with like a lot of like other saliva and fluid. And I was like, well, she coughed, cried for like 30 seconds. I threw the Hershey's Kiss in the garbage and went back to watching the news because it was like no big deal.
Right.
But like, I don't know what would have happened had I not been through that training. I mean, I probably would have done something, but I wouldn't have known exactly what to do without even thinking about it.
Right. And you probably wouldn't have gone back to necessarily watching the show within 30 seconds either. There may have been a few minutes of panic of, is she okay? But in this case, you knew, like, all right, we got it out, back to the evening.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's funny too is that I'm assuming whatever you saw in that brochure that made you start thinking originally about the Navy SEALs, you were not anticipating the medicine part of it and being in New York and that couple months of training and whatnot. Yet there you were.
Yeah, phenomenal though.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah, the training that I got. When I showed up in New York, I'm in my 3rd and 4th week. I was in Bellevue Hospital. I'm sorry, Kings County Hospital in the Bronx, New York. And, there's med students in there that are they're in their residency. There's some in residency. There's some in their final like months of med school. And I found myself teaching them like a chest tube because I'd already done them. And, yeah, it's just crazy. The amount of training that we got.
That's cool. Before we get into your first mission, you had some skydive training at some point. Maybe not training, but you have jumped out of planes.
Yeah. So right after Bud's, at the time, what we had done is gone to Fort Benning, Georgia, to the Army's Airborne. And I say at the time because now we have our own like internal training. I think mostly because of money and time. The static line airborne course that the Army has is 3 weeks long. It's kind of designed for the lowest common denominator, maybe I could say, if I with all due respect. But it's just something that's like, so something that is the military, whether it's diving, skydiving, jumping out of a plane, rappelling from a plane. The military makes all that stuff that's really fun terrible. I mean, like, we have to have all these safety parameters, which is required and I think is wise. But it's just like something with the culture. They make it not fun. And so at Benning, it's like they take something that you could learn in about 4 hours and they pack it into 3 weeks. You know, I say that tongue in cheek because that's really what it ends up being. To a point though, part of those guys that are going through airborne, they're in kind of a selection process. So it makes a lot of sense for the Army. But for us, it's just like, oh man, we're going to sitting strapped into these rigs for 4 hours, waiting our turn to get in the plane. And like the thing already sucks on your back and it's uncomfortable until you're in the air under canopy. That's when it's finally like nice. So yeah, I mean, so static line, I remember, I was second in line in what's called a stick. It's the line that you're going to jump out of the aircraft with, right behind my friend from Buds, BJ O'Rourke. And I was like, dude, if you go, I'll go. Like, and he went, so I had to go, right? So misery loves company. And, yeah, I mean, from there, like in 2004, then I finally went through free fall. And the thing that's different is how you control the canopy and how you control your descent, specifically when your feet hit the ground. You can, with the rigs that we jump free fall, they're so large that if you don't have a lot of equipment on, you can literally tiptoe onto the ground when you land. So a lot better for knees and back.
Yeah. Sounds slightly different than when you're going just as a civilian and you got the tandem on your back. I've done that 7 times now. And I've thought about trying to get enough training or do the course or whatever to be able to jump solo, but I don't know if I want that. You know, it's a lot of fun when you have someone that's on your back and you know that they've done this hundreds of times and the chances of something going wrong is hopefully next to none. Whereas I don't know if I trust myself to get myself safely to the ground like these guys can.
You probably, so I think it's 500 jumps that you have to have before you can be qualified as a tandem instructor or not instructor, but to be allowed to do a tandem jump. But probably they have much more than that 500. So I do groundwork for something called the Patriot Parachute Team. So we do a lot of jumps for charities. In fact, we did a 4th of July jump out here at the Austin Country Club right here. And yeah, so but these guys have, 12,000, 17,000. One guy's got 22,000 jumps and he's got 7 world records. So like if you want him to land on second base in a stadium, he'll land there.
You could blindfold him, make him dizzy, turn him around a few times, throw him out the plane backwards.
It's pretty awesome.
He's still going to land wherever he wants after 22,000 jumps.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And he's only like 36 or something. Like you think, like, how do you pack that in? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But he's just doing it all day long, every day.
He's doing it for the military?
No, he jumps just he's actually an instructor with one of our outfits out in California.
Okay.
So
22,000. Jeez Louise.
Yeah.
So let's go back to you graduated. You were in New York for a time. Your first deployment, where'd you go to?
So we forward staged in a small country called Bahrain. It's the coast of Saudi Arabia, west of Qatar, Oman, that area. Sort of like the Las Vegas of Saudi Arabia. All the Saudis go there a lot of Saudis go there to sort of party and relax. Women go there to drive because they can't drive in Saudi Arabia. So that's always a challenge on the road there when you're driving. Not because they're women, but because they don't drive. So I honestly had a great time. I've been to Bahrain a number of times. I probably spent a total of 3.5 years there. Obviously our ally, the Navy parks their ships there, replenishes them. So we went there and deployed. We did maritime interdiction operations. At the time, Saddam Hussein had like sanctions on what he could export via the Tigris and the Euphrates. He had like caps on how much oil he could export. So we were capturing, I mean, this is 99. We're capturing some of his ships, boarding and like sort of reselling them under the UN sanction. So that was pretty cool. I mean, it was finally doing like the job, you know.
Yeah. And then on your very first mission or operation, you mentioned too that you guys killed a couple bad guys. Were you expecting that, or?
Well, that was my first like real combat like deployment. I mean, it was technically combat when we were doing the interdiction, but no one ever fired around or anything. So when I was in Iraq in 2006, at this point, you remember I was an instructor. So when I had gone to be an instructor September of 2001, so I saw students come back who had been in combat, and it was sort of like this. I was happy for them, but a little jealous and envious. So I was really excited to get out and get some work done. And by the time I was in Iraq in early 2006, I was staged in a house in Baghdad with a Green Beret group, an ODA group, and we had gone out to some guy's house that was involved in deploying Iranian-made IEDs. These are these roadside bombs that were, they were like the shape of them were defeating our armor that we had in our vehicles. And so we found a group of these guys in a house and dispatched them because they were trying to shoot at us. Yeah. So that was the first time, like, I'd seen a lot of people die, but when it's done sort of at your hand and you watch those agonal movements, which is the sort of the last thing your body does, like as it's dying, it was a little bit of a different perspective, sort of like made me lose sleep for a night or two. No regrets about any. In fact, now as we record this, Israel's going through their thing with Palestine, and I feel like I should be over there. So I have no regrets, and just if I could go back and do more, I would.
Why do you feel like you should be over there?
So that's kind of the thing, that we all have this like drive and purpose, right? In fact, I feel like, from my observations, the military and American soldiers, Marines, and people that serve, when they finish their service, because most do after 4, 8, 10 years, that purpose is sort of gone, right? Like, you have this pretty amazing camaraderie, this pretty amazing like mission statement, and a purpose, and that's gone. And I think, I mean, there's stories of, even in 2008, 2010, you know, a friend just told me the other day, he's like, yeah, I had a buddy in the Marine Corps. He's on a 53, which is one of the largest helicopters it's the largest helicopter in our military. He's a gunner strafing people in Syria, lands, packs his gear, flies to California. Within 24 hours, he's handed his papers. It's called the DD-214, and he's out of the Marine Corps. So within 36 hours, he's walking around California, and his purpose is gone. You know? And so, like, that's not the right way to give someone a severance in the things that they're doing, right? There's some healing that needs to happen first, right? So, but yeah, I think that loss of purpose or that lack of purpose is something that probably is a contributor to, the depression that guys are facing, gals are facing, suicide, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think if they had the ability to identify another purpose that would drive them in the same manner, I think it would be massively helpful. So
it's interesting that you bring this up because a couple months ago, I have a friend who's been part of the Marines for, let's see, it's 2023 and 12 years, if I had to guess. It's been a pretty long time. And he called me up, not in a panic or anything, but just to sort of think out loud. And he's like, what do I do when I leave? I said, what do you mean? And he's like, I've never really thought about it. I finished high school and my whole life has been Marines. Didn't go to college, don't have an associate's, bachelor's, general ed. I've been overseas a bunch of times and felt like I did my duty for America. Now he's working as a recruiter out in Idaho. And he's just like, I'm going to leave one day, whether it's 7 years from now, 2 years from now. He's like, what does that look like? I said, buddy, let me introduce you to Eric. I'm the wrong guy to be, I can't answer that question for you, man.
Yeah. I mean, if I were to say that there was any advice for anyone listening that has someone like this who is either struggling or about to get out and has no idea, just encourage them to find that second mountain, whatever that is. There's a book called Second Mountain. That's why I use it. It's speaks to what I'm talking about because I know there's stories of these guys that landed on the moon in 1969 and they come back and it's depression, it's alcoholism, it's all these things that are really similar to what we're seeing with our combat vets. Because what do you do after you land on the moon, dude?
Right. It's a pretty big achievement.
So there's memes. You'll see memes like guys like in a firefight in Afghanistan. It's a picture of U.S. soldiers doing it. And it's like, you're never going to be this cool again. And that's really like how I think a lot of us internalize that. And so you got to find something to do that has an impact to give you fulfillment. So, yeah.
You mentioned, we'll come back to this, but you mentioned that, during that mission in 2006, that you had no regrets, but you also couldn't sleep. You lost sleep for a night or two. Do you find from your experience, is there a way to sort of cope with that? Or how do you sort of get back to being able to regulate your sleep and not have any regrets and just sort of know that you did the right thing without, losing sleep over it, literally or figuratively?
Well, look, these guys killed a lot of our dudes, so I have no regrets. I have no qualms about that at all. I think where guys get, and pardon me, but I say guys, but are women that are involved in the military and have the same kind of source for PTSD. I think where people have real struggles is when they watch their friend in pieces, like, people that they knew at boot camp and 4 years later they're deployed with them and they're picking up chunks of flesh to bring back. Like that's where I met a guy the other day who he was a Marine on a helicopter gunner, and they were on a mission, and he watched his best friend in the helicopter in front of him. They just nosedive and came into a ball of fire. Mm. And he's the gunner, and he's like, I felt the heat from the burning fuel. And so, like, that feeling is massively saddening for him. So when there's times that he feels that same kind of heat all of a sudden, like, it triggers that, like, that emotion of losing a friend. So I think people that lose a friend like that have a lot of
all good,
have a lot of emotional responses, right? So I think those are the things that keep people up at night, because then, a lot of times guys feel responsible. Like, well, what could I have done? And then sometimes there's survival remorse. And so thankfully, I had only one guy that got killed on a mission that I knew, and I just, he was doing what he loved. So it sucks. In my phone, that was in front of me. In my phone, I have 30 people still that are dead. Some from suicide in the last 5-6 years. But I keep them in there just because when I'm searching for someone else and I see it, I'm like, it's awesome. Love that guy. So sleep. Oh, man. I could talk a lot about sleep.
Let's talk about sleep.
All right. Well, so I was introduced to something called sleep hygiene. Have you ever heard this?
I've heard this term.
Yeah. And a lot of people haven't. So I had the fortune of like really getting evaluated fully by an amazing crew called the National Intrepid. What is it? It's at Walter Reed or Bethesda. Dang it, I can't remember the acronym. Anyways, they're there, and a lot of special operations guys go through it. But I had 9 doctors for a month. A psychologist or a psychiatrist, a neurologist, family medicine, a psychologist who was a therapist, a spine doctor, and some other things I can't even remember. But the first hour you're there, you're sitting in the room with 9 doctors, and they're all asking you questions. It's pretty incredible. So part of that process, with that evaluation is like, there's some training involved. So they teach you a little bit about like sleeping properly. And for the most part, I would say 90% of us are doing it wrong. And, simple things that you'd imagine like, oh, I should probably exercise 3 days a week, 4 days a week, because it also helps you sleep. Things that you might not think about: avoiding blue light.
Don't say that one, Eric.
Before 2 hours before bedtime. Why shouldn't I say that?
Because
there's a TV in your bedroom?
No, no, there's not. I didn't mean it so much for me personally as I meant it for amongst my friends, family, people in my circle, myself included. The way I end my day is in that recliner, dog in my lap. I try to keep it to 1 episode. Maybe once a week we'll do 2 episodes of whatever show we're watching. Then I put him to bed and then I go to bed. So there's definitely not a 2-hour window. It's like a 10-minute window from shutting the TV off to doing my final rituals and then jumping into the mattress. But I feel like so many of us, whether it's the phone, the TV, the computer, even me, last Friday night, I procrastinated, I will admit to that, on getting the next day's episode ready to drop. So I had my computer in my face until 1 a.m. and then attempted to fall asleep right after that. So it's just, we have all these devices that are in our faces that I would bet that in the U.S., the population of people that have no blue light in front of them for even 30 minutes before going to bed is probably a pretty low number.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is sort of a routine to wind down is great, because you're taking your mind away from what you're normally doing, and there's another like aspect of having a body with you, be it a dog. But with technology these days on our phones and these devices, you can have it toggle off the blue light. So for the listeners that don't know what the heck I'm talking about, so light exists in all kinds of different spectrums. And there's a part of the spectrum that is meant to arise you when you awake. And it's emitted from the sun. So naturally, caveman days were, you see light, you wake up, it's time to get up. Because we're diurnal. So that same light spectrum exists in LEDs and LCD screens. But with the technology these days, you can toggle that off. So you can schedule your phone. I think it's on iPhone, it's called night shift. It might be called something different with different devices. It is a little annoying because everything looks weirdly yellow. But it serves also as a reminder, okay, like whether you set it for 9 or 10 or whatever, it ends up being 2 hours before you go to bed. I'm sure TVs have it, but I'm glad to hear you don't have one in your bedroom. So they told us there that your bed is for 2 things and one is sleeping.
What's the other one?
Sex.
Okay, I figured you were going to say that. But I wasn't sure if maybe there is on the lines of sleep hygiene there is something else. But no, I figured that was the answer. But
not reading, not watching TV, not working, for God's sakes.
I do read in bed. Why is that discouraged or not ideal?
Because you're gonna Pavlov condition your brain to being like, okay, I'm reading, it's time to go to sleep. And so if you read at noon, you might fall asleep.
Reading does make me very sleepy.
Well, that guy, that crafty Russian was right.
We were talking about night shift.
More sleep hygiene. Ready? Okay, a couple more things. Don't work out 2 hours before. Don't eat 2 hours before. And then if you have trouble sleeping, like I've had these great ideas throughout my life, and then I find out they exist somewhere else. But I feel like I came up with this on my own. I've sort of combined all these different things. And I had a lot of trouble because I would wake up at 2 and I'd be up. It was sort of like a autonomic nervous system response where I'd be in fight or flight. So I had to like figure this out. I would shut my eyes, literally visually focus on whatever that is in the back of my eyelid or those anomalies that appear because of whatever your retina's doing. And I would look at that at the same time, count my breaths, my inhales and exhales, 4 seconds, 4 second inhale, 4 second exhale. I just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Focusing on what I'm looking at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You just keep doing that. You'll have a thought like, oh, I got to send John that email tomorrow. I got to remember to I got to pump the tires up because that one was low. Just let them go. It's okay. Keep counting, keep focusing. And for me, one of 2 things happens. I start to have these weird abstract thoughts, which ends up being kind of a dream, but I'm so focused on counting because that focus is what eliminates all of the ancillary stuff that's going through my head throughout the day. And I sort of, because of that focus on my counting, I'm kind of waking back into counting. The other thing that happens is 8 hours later, I wake up. It's phenomenal. 9 out of 10 people I tell this to, they're like, I can't believe it. It's so easy it works. Some struggle because they have too many thoughts going on. But I'm just like, you just got to work through it. You just got to count. Don't feel like the people that I tell this to and it doesn't work. It's usually people that have these emotional connections to whatever they're doing. Moms, women, because guys don't care. So they struggle with that emotional part. So they just, don't feel guilty about those thoughts because then they just get worked up. It's 2 hours later. I'm still just 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I'm out with this technique.
I could have used that Sunday night.
Try it next time.
Monday morning. It's very rare for me to wake up between 1 and 5 and be instantly awake. Sunday, the only anomaly that I could have thought of was I went to ACL. I had 4 drinks.
What's ACL?
Austin City Limits.
Oh, dude, I got to hear about this.
You don't know what it is?
Nope. San Antonio, man. I've only been here for 3 years, but I've been up on 6th Street once.
So ACL is a giant 6-day music festival that's split out over 2 weekends, Friday through Sunday. It's the exact same band both weekends. So if you go one Friday, there's no reason to go the following Friday because it would be the exact same lineup, songs, etc. But it's all day. They take over Zilker Park in that Barton Springs area. Mm-hmm. So it shuts down that entire, which sort of sucks for pet owners because then we have to go find somewhere else to bring our dogs for 6 weekends, but it's fine. And it is if you've been to, I feel like ACL was sort of confirmation to me that if you've been to one music festival, you've been to them all. It was thousands of people, way too many for my liking. You're just shoulder to shoulder. If you wanted to get out of there for whatever reason, it's going to take you a minimum of 20 minutes to work through this crowd if you're somewhere near the front.
Got it.
So if you like music, if you like being outside, if you like being with tens of thousands of people all screaming, yelling, singing to your favorite bands, then it's a fantastic place to be.
Are we talking headliners?
It was a weird lineup. The top people were like Hozier, Shania Twain, Alanis Morissette, Mumford and Sons. It was a very weird group of musicians.
So yeah, music lovers.
Yeah. Are you
People that are like, I listen to everything. Yeah.
Does this sound like something you would enjoy next year or this weekend?
ACL.
It's going on this coming weekend. There's
Nice.
3 more opportunities if you got a few bucks.
3 more weeks, huh?
3 more days. This coming Friday, Saturday, and Sunday is the
Got
last
it.
3 days of the event.
Got it.
Yeah.
Could be.
Could be. But yeah, woke up at 2 a.m., I think it was. Tried to go back to sleep. Woke up again at like 3:15. It probably didn't help that I kept checking the clock. Should have just turned around and closed my eyes. Woke up again at 4:10. And then finally at 5:20, I said, fuck it. And I got up and just started my day.
Yep.
And I was exhausted the whole day. You felt, I'm sure you've been sleep deprived, when you get like 3 or 4, obviously I'm preaching to the choir here. You've done a ton of that, but yeah, Monday was not a fun day.
I get it.
And I did not exceed my normal caffeine. I did not want it to be, okay, well, I normally only have 1 cup of coffee. Let me have 5 because I kept it to the 1. Just because it seemed like it was a good idea to not then overload my body with 600 milligrams.
That was the other piece that I didn't mention and I forgot. But no caffeine after like 1 or 2 in the afternoon, depending upon how much you normally drink.
So you're like this.
So the half-life of caffeine, meaning like when it deteriorates and doesn't operate the way it should inside your body, is like 6 to 8 hours.
One of my buddies, he's 19. And he gets to the gym between 6 and 7 p.m. and drinks anywhere from 400 to 600 milligrams of pre-workout before he gets there.
Yeah, I know people that do that. I mean, so there's thermogenics involved in that too, but yeah, that's too much for me.
Yeah, same here. On the flip side of sleep hygiene, a friend of mine texted me a few months ago and said, hey, I listened to this episode of Andrew Huberman. Are you familiar with this
No.
guy? He's like... I don't really even know who he is, to be honest. I think he's a doctor, has a lot of credentials backing his findings, and he has a podcast and he talks about stuff like sleep hygiene. And so my buddy says, do you want me to take a 3-hour episode and condense it into one text and give you an exercise to try out? And I said, sure. And he says, what do you normally do when you wake up in the morning? I said, I grab coffee, I grab the dog, I grab my cell phone, it's back in bed, playing on the phone for 20 to 30 minutes tops. And he says, all right, try this for a week. Tell me how you feel. Instead of looking at the phone, just shut off the alarm. Don't allow yourself to do anything else other than just hitting stop. And instead of grabbing a cup of coffee, grab a bottle of water. And instead of getting back in bed, take your walk immediately. And I said, okay. I felt great.
Yep. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't do it 7 days a week, but we're pretty good we probably get it about 5 days a week. That's
Nice.
my new habit.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of studies right now being done about, so when you turn your phone on and you start going through it, like, just because of the dopamine infusions you're getting from your reactions to what you're seeing on your phone, it's kind of messing with your daily physiology. And that's why I think a lot of people are suggesting, like, go to water first and get your blood flowing before you start getting those, what do they call it? I don't know, like basically dopamine and serotonin infusions that come from like someone liking your podcast, or I got 10 more followers. Like those things feel good and it triggers those things, and you kind of deplete that for the wrong period of your day.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
One thing I like about the podcast site that I use is all the numbers are kept to a very specific page, and I almost rarely click on it. I do at times, but
Yeah.
I can't. I have some friends who are in there. If they drop an episode on a Monday, they're refreshing that page every hour. I'm like, dude, you're
Yeah.
you're gonna crumble as somebody like that's what I can't.
Someone says you're stupid. You're gonna be balled up in the shower, sucking your thumb.
With all the different parts of the country that or not the country, the world that you've traveled to, any places, any profound experiences, or just really eye-opening moments during those 23 years with the Navy?
I guess so obviously I get asked this sometimes, like, where's the coolest place you went? Like, well, I went to shitty places. Like I said, I had a great time in Bahrain. It's awesome. One thing that I found super interesting, there's a town in Germany called Trier, and it's sort of like west central Germany. And there's this beautiful Roman gate that still exists, and the carvings in it are still there. On the inside, you can see like Mary. It's all kind of black, I think, from smog from vehicles and everything. But they also have a Colosseum there. And the thing that's missing in the Colosseum in Rome is the I guess it's the underground. I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but it's where they did all the theatrical preparations and everything for what would actually be seen by the audience. Well, that underground is like in great shape in Trier. It says Trier. Just super cool. And then in this Colosseum, it was built into the earth, and they surmised that there was a dome. This is like 2,000 years ago. They had some kind of dome. And then the hill goes up around the stadium, and they had vineyards there. They literally serve wine at the games or whatever they're doing there. They would flood this thing and do crazy stuff. So the wine was like cultivated right there, and cool beer here. That guy like walking up and down like the steps, like whatever, like
fresh wine here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing to like be there, and like I'm in Germany, and this is like an area that Rome had. I mean, obviously they had control of like a third of the globe at one point, or whatever it is. But yeah, it's pretty cool. So I thought that was really neat, that area. Nothing really profound, no real profound experiences, I guess.
Have you heard about this this thing that's apparently going around, not just in Austin, but I guess throughout culture, of significant others asking their boyfriends or husbands how often or when was the last time you thought about the Roman Empire?
No, what is this?
To be honest, I don't know. I guess it's something where there's this like thing with guys and how often they think about Rome. And I had the same reaction you did. I was like, when I play a video game and I choose to be like the Roman, I have a game I play that's essentially world domination. You choose who do you want to be? The US, the Byzantines, whoever. I'm like, that's probably the last time I thought about Rome was when I played that game, which was a year ago. But it led me to asking a law student that came on if there is a modern day gladiator tournament, take our stadium here at DKR. If this announcement went out, which of course this will never happen. This is a hypothetical. And it said, hey, we're having a gladiator tournament in 2023, selling tickets. Would you go?
Are we talking about like people that fight to death?
Yep.
I mean, I'd be really interested in seeing it. But the thought of that is pretty crazy.
Right.
I don't know. Is that what this is all about? Or you just came up with that with this law student?
I just came up because I wanted his perspective, just given that he thinks about life, and one of the things that he wants to do is defend people and make sure that he's very passionate about making sure that we are very careful with the death sentence, and that, people who are getting that are, we are 99.99999% confident that this person should in fact be getting this. So it sort of just led to an interesting conversation where my follow-up question to him was, does the source of the contestants matter? So let's say
like
it was
death penalty people, like let them fight it out.
Right.
Man, that'd be interesting, huh? Morally, I don't think it's right, but it certainly would be entertaining.
Versus if it was 12 volunteers. where whoever was hosting this event, this tournament, was able to find 12 individuals who would fight in it, knowing that 11 out of 12 of us will be dead at the end of this, but maybe our families are getting $1 billion. I don't know.
Proceeds from the pay-per-view.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think we'd be able to deal with it morally, but certainly it'd be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't seen that in so long that you throw
I'm curious about this Rome. Like, when's the last time you thought about Rome?
Do you know?
It's weird. Do I know when the last time I thought about it was?
Yeah.
I mean, 2 minutes ago when I told you that story.
Right.
Before that, I have no idea. I have no idea.
Got it. All right, back to you. And enough of this. When was the last time you thought about Rome? When 23 years with the military, at least to me, seems like a pretty long time. Why did it last that long? Was just one opportunity after the other, and didn't it feel like the right time to leave? Or
yeah, I mean, so my initial enlistment was 6 years because of this contract and the extra time that I had to go and do the medic training. So at the end of that, I was poised to get out, and a buddy of mine was like, "Hey man, you should probably go back to Bud's instructor, get your degree," because the Navy at the time was paying tuition, and I think they still do. They at least did it for many years. And so basically it was free school.
Sure.
And I was like, well, yeah, sure, why not? So I did that. And then when I transferred over there, the military as a whole experienced what's called a stop loss. So you weren't allowed to get out anyways because we were going to Afghanistan to war. And so the reason I got out is because the stuff that I was doing in the Persian Gulf wasn't exciting enough for me. It wasn't what I signed up for. I thought it was going to be off like dispatching people and doing really cool stuff. And so now I had the opportunity to go do it. So I'm like, yeah, so I just kept staying in.
And then what year did you leave?
2018, I retired. Actually, that's a really cool story. I'm so thankful for this. Normally, like San Diego, Virginia Beach, and a couple of other places that SEALs retire from, isn't necessarily where your family's from, right? So it ends up just being like, for the retiree, it's like, yeah, I'm not going to keep you guys long. You're going to stand at attention for like 10 minutes. It's going to suck. I'm just going to speak real quick, and then we'll go to the bar and get drunk. That's what like a retirement is, right? In Virginia Beach, generally. But for me, because I was back in my hometown doing this recruiting thing, my aunts, my uncles, this guy that I grew up with, whose dad was on the Minnesota Twins, like he was a musician. He played my national anthem, like Jimi Hendrix style. Like I had all these people that influenced my young childhood there, including a couple of really close friends from the SEAL teams. It's just an awesome thing. The church that I grew up in, like these old ladies that had my name in the bulletin for 23 years, right? Like they were there to see me like healthy,
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
That is cool. That's awesome. Did you have any of that identity crisis when you got out?
So because I had this sort of slow transition, so my job as this recruiter mentor was working out with kids. So I just decided to do that to test their commitment. Like I'll meet you at the YMCA at 5 a.m. So after they went off to high school, after that, I had nothing else to do the rest of the day. So my brother and I this is how I got started in real estate. So we started flipping homes. So I sort of developed this profession during my time in. So I had like sort of this long drawn out transition, not the type of thing that I told you about with this guy that was in Syria one day and Redding, California the next,
Redding, California.
Yeah.
So you were flipping houses for how long did that last for?
We did that for about 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you still do that or no?
At this point, like because he's there and I'm here, and I've got some rental properties now that I don't want the hassle anymore. And yeah. So.
And then what came next?
You mean, what do you mean?
As far as, so whether it was
So retiring,
the nonprofit that you opened was one thing I was hoping to
Yeah,
touch on.
yeah,
As
cool.
well as method, I guess, as well as Ukraine is the three main things and sort of what, in whatever order they happened.
Yeah, awesome. So when I got to Minnesota in 2014, I was seeking out a nonprofit organization that I could learn from because I wanted to start my own. And I came across this Minnesotans Military Appreciation Fund. The family that started that phenomenal family, Gene Sitt, the late Gene Sitt is who started it. His son Roger now runs it. What they do is they give grants to Minnesota combat veterans. So when he first started it, the IRS told him, like, yeah, this is great, but you're going to have to give the service members a 1099 for income. He's like, I'm not doing that. Like, you guys have to figure this out. Like, I'm not going to give them a gift and then they have to pay taxes.
Right.
So he worked with Tim Pawlenty, who was the governor at the time in Minnesota, and they figured out a way to, like, I think the IRS wrote like a sentence or two in some like text paragraph code that allowed this grant to be given tax-free, which is like pretty phenomenal for a charity to be able to accomplish.
That's awesome.
And so the way that whole organization was run was just incredible. And so I learned from that. And then I started my own when I was a real estate agent doing these things and helping people get into homes. If it was a veteran or a cop or a fireman or something, I would, if they bought a home, I would give them part of my commission back so that they could, because people, you kind of get surprised, like, oh yeah, we got to buy a washer and dryer. Or like, oh crap, a lawnmower. I've never owned a lawnmower or whatever. It's their first home, so just gave them some money so that they could do some of those small things.
Yeah. And you called it the Uncommon Hero Project, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How'd you come up with that name?
I don't know, just contemplated over here and there. And yeah, I don't know how I came up with it. It's just an epiphany, I guess.
Yeah. Well, because when I read it, I thought, I consider, maybe it's just me, but I consider like firemen, police, any branch of the military.
Yep. Teachers.
I guess not. I see now I'm backpedaling on what I was going to say.
No, you're good.
I was going to say they are not common, but like I've never thought of them of anything else.
Yeah.
So I guess you wouldn't want to call them a common hero because then that would be like downplaying their service. That's the thing.
Unfortunately, like that was like registered in Minnesota and I'm gone. I'm not an agent anymore. So that's kind of died out. But I'm still involved in like nonprofit work. In fact, Method Endeavors, which we'll get to in a second. We've done a couple of large events where we're training police officers who are at, normally departments that don't have money to fund a lot of training. So we help them through a really grueling course, be better prepared to respond to active shooters. So we do this in like elementary schools with role players and kids screaming and they have to deal with the fire department trying to get in to help. And so there's a long process to the training and some really realistic scenarios that we run them through.
I would imagine, are they pretty grateful for those trainings?
Oh yeah,
they nerd out over.
Yeah, I mean, like, some of our testimonials are like super awesome. Like one lady's like, normally when I go to any training with the department, the second day I'm like, oh my God, I got to get up and I got to do this again. But she was like, I woke up an hour early, just super excited to come here. And we caught that on film, so we have that as like one of our testimonies.
Heck yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I have to ask, for trainings such as these, who are these kids? Like kids of the families, so that way there's some
families.
comfort.
So we try to get like JROTC kids. Yeah, so whatever we can come up with. Yeah, so we can, like have something called moulage where it's like makeup for like injuries, and it's meant to give shock to the officers when they first enter the building, because there might be someone laying there like screaming and grabbing at them because their knees blown up from a gunshot. So when they see that, they're like, and it's like, hey, you have to focus on the first problem. The first problem is that shooter. It's like instinct, like you want to get down and help, but like Like, that's not the priority. Like, she's screaming, she's alive, she's breathing. Like, get to the shooter before 10 more people get killed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or she's dead. There's no use in spending time on her. Like, get to the shooter.
Have you found any any nonprofits, either local to Austin or nationally, that you'd want to shout out?
I haven't really connected with anything locally yet. And then the Patriot Parachute Team, we do a lot of Folds of Honor events. And Folds of Honor helps Gold Star families, survivors pay for college. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Method Endeavors. You told me right before we started recording you are co-owner?
Yep. Yeah, co-owner, acting as the COO. Yep.
Why'd you guys start Method Endeavors?
So the founder, Devin Ayuto, a good friend of mine I met in 2012 in Afghanistan. He was one of our support guys at the SEAL teams. I met him because he was kind of running the logistics of a camp there, and he did all of my scheduling for air assets that I had coming in and out. So we just became friends, and he just became a go-to guy because he just one of those people that just got it done, which I needed to support what I was doing. And he had gotten back. He was a master at arms, which is like a police officer in the Navy. He had gotten back from his reserve time and joined a defense contractor and did a bunch of work, did some protective details, did some like PI kind of work. And the owner of that company kind of mentored him into starting his own thing. So he kind of launched that in 2016. I was still in the Navy, like finishing my time. So he sort of built up the training aspect to it over time. And we made it kind of a massive growth last year when Russia invaded Ukraine.
So
yeah,
Method Endeavors, and how you were involved with the Russia-Ukraine crisis in 2022.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a company reached out to us through mutual contact, a publicly traded company, right when Putin invaded Ukraine. And they had a significant amount of their operations being conducted remotely out of Ukraine from people that lived there. And they were now isolated in these combat areas. So since they were publicly traded, they had an urgency to get them out. So we signed a contract with them to extract their people. And on our way over there, another group of individuals that were just like a private company needed the same thing. So we hired, Devin and I hired a dozen former special operations guys that had experience in the Army, in the Navy, with the CIA. And we went over there to figure out how we were going to do this. So it was pretty simple at the beginning, but it grew very complex as Ukraine and the government sort of adjusted to what they needed in terms of personnel to fight and defend their homeland. So I say that because, everybody that we were having to get out of Ukraine and into somewhere in the EU where they had asylum, it was men. And men were conscripted, so they weren't really They weren't really allowed to leave. So when I was on the way over there, I knew that we were going to have to establish a network, a support network, transportation, housing, from these eastern regions into where we were sort of setting up base camp in Poland. And we had Poland, Slovakia, Moldova, Romania, all as options. So I had gotten on the phone with my friend Ryan from Bloomington and went back to this group of folks at Bible college because the same place I went to was producing, even at the time, pastors from Ukraine and Latvia and these other Eastern Bloc countries. I engaged one guy and immediately he connected me with like 13 churches throughout the country. So I immediately had cars, food, housing, and all these things like right away. It's just like awesome. Everything that happened with us, we would have a challenge and then we would just have like this red carpet and then a challenge and then like the stuff that's fallen into our lap. It's just crazy, man. Even like the second group of people that we had as a contract. I mean, I talked to Devin, I was like, can we handle more? He's like, we'll just hire more. I'm like, well, the only way we're going to do this is if we charge like this crazy amount of money. I'm like, oh, all right, if they take it, they take it. So they did. And yeah, all of a sudden we had to get out like 100 people, families and men. And the massively rewarding thing about it was, and I'll get into some of the details because it's super, for me, it was just like the most complex and the most rewarding thing that I've ever done. But we would get easily sometimes many times on their own, the women and kids would cross the border and end up in Poland and get their papers, their asylum, and their sort of like a green card or whatever to be able to work and collect some kind of like subsidies from EU to live. And then they didn't know when their dads and husbands were going to be there. And we didn't tell them because we had techniques and things we were doing that we didn't want public. And so sometimes we would say, hey, like there's some papers you got to sign. You got to meet us at this like gas station or whatever. And they'd be there waiting. And then we'd pull up and their dad would get out of the car and they'd reunite. And it's just like this massively emotional thing. It was just super awesome. Yeah. So the first couple of people that we got across, it was like a national park that was like part in Poland and part in Ukraine. So like there's like pictures of it on Google Maps that are saved in that area. It's like people walk around, they're like hanging out at this like these posts that mark the border. Just walked them across. I mean, it was like not that simple, but all we had to do was walk them across. The law enforcement and border patrol on the Ukraine side was like really alert because they just thought that Russians were going to infiltrate from everywhere. So we got detained by them just a number of times because they knew we weren't from around there. A lot of these small towns along the border. At one point we couldn't even drive cars. So we would have to do it right before daylight. We used something called a pilot car where you have like a sacrificial car in the front and that got pulled over a couple times. So we had to abort. So there's all these like challenges that popped up and then we had to accommodate and revert back to our training. And the cool thing about that was for me, in some of the intelligence training that I had from the Navy, my instructors were like people that were in the CIA at Moscow Station, like teaching you like Cold War era techniques, which I never used in Afghanistan or Iraq because it was not necessarily not all of it wasn't necessarily applicable, just the methods that we were using with the locals there. But now I'm literally in Eastern Bloc Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, like doing this. I'm like, this is it. Like, this is awesome. And so super exciting for me. Yeah, I mean, we'd have guys detained. It was real, at gunpoint. Some guy that just got trained last week, and it yelling Ukrainian, and we're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, can't understand. And the Russians and the Ukrainians can speak. Like, Ukrainians know Russian, and a lot of Russians know Ukrainian, so they just know Russian, and so they can talk. But once they identified that we couldn't understand them and his passports, and then it's like, what are you doing here? Like, well, we're handing out medical aid and like helping your guys help. And then that turned into like, one day it was like, well, can you teach us how to shoot better? Like, well, look, like that's what we do. Like, okay. So now we're like teaching these guys, but also like running around behind their back, trying to get their men out of their country.
Interesting.
And yeah, just crazy, man. Like, and dealing with checkpoints and some of the conflict areas, and and some of these people, they've never experienced this before in Kiev. So like they're in bunkers, and they hear gunfire that's a mile away, and they feel like they got to hunker down in a bunker below ground, and they just don't know any better. So it's just like sad to talk to them. Yeah, I mean, such an awesome experience. I got, at one point, I met this guy in Poland. I had called out, so as a buddy of ours, another SEAL who has like this incredible life story. His nickname's Drago. So he grew up in Soviet Poland under Soviet control. And in the late 70s, his family was arrested. He talks about these things. Like, he came to Warsaw and was like pointing these things out to me. His apartment, which is like tiny, that had all his family in it. That was given to him, graciously, right, by the Soviet Union. He ended up in a gulag, in prison. And then the Pope at the time made some deal, and he got out, and then they claimed asylum to the U.S., and then he joined the Navy and became a SEAL. And in Iraq, he started working with the Polish special operations called GROM. So I flew him out immediately so I could get connected with these former GROM guys that helped us out a bunch. And they introduced me to this dude in Poland. And the best that I could describe this guy is like, this like hillbilly, hilljack dude who's like a redneck, but like crafty as all hell, and like will make whatever you want to make, right? Like ingenuity with very little resources. And so I concocted this plan with the help of some other folks that were a part of this group in Poland that was like the formation of it back in the 50s was just counter Soviet Union stuff. So they had this culture of like secrecy and underground everything you could think of. So they were moving cigarettes. I don't know, it was like smuggling cigarettes. And this guy worked on a river, and he had these barges that he would use for normal operations and then to move cigarettes. So I got him to weld a secret compartment in a passenger bus. And like an artist, dude, like you look at this bus and you inspect it, like you'd never know. You'd never know, like, unless you're like an architect, like you wouldn't know that there's this weird, like 2.5 by 2.5 foot space by like 6 feet or 8 feet that because you walk around one side, look at the other side, like, and then the way that it was painted and welded, it just looked like it was protecting a drive shaft or something. And so we were able to like pile in a number of people and just do trips through the border. The first time we tried it, though, it was like, it got down to like 25 degrees. And the trip from Lviv to the border was, because of traffic and lines, was like 6 hours. And we were like, dude, if we open this hatch and like, what are we going to do if these guys are dead? But thankfully, everybody survived, and we got to do those cool reunions with their family. Like, so over the course of like really about a month, and even like after about 15 days, like the companies that we were working with, they're getting antsy. Like, when are we getting everybody out? Like, man, like we've been arrested like a dozen times, man. Like we're doing it.
Right.
Like, we've gotten these people over, and it's like 2 briefs a day that I'm briefing everybody. And so, yeah, I mean, and the help that we had from, one of the companies and all these people that, like the locals just sort of like started helping each other, And so those churches like helped us a ton. And then we basically, there was like, it's funny how human resiliency is. Like, if you think of like these combat zones, well, you still need food, you still need commerce to a point, right?
Yep.
And then like conflict in this sense, like creates this new, are we good?
We're good. Yeah.
Conflict sort of creates this new problem set in entrepreneurship. So you just saw the emergence of like these taxi drivers that would drive people, like, and it's dangerous because of some of these checkpoints. But we were able to hire some of these guys. We're like, yeah, I got these routes. Like, I go around the checkpoints. I know these back roads and whatever. A 30-minute drive is going to take 6 hours, but I'll get them there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, all the networks that we needed to conduct our semi-legal human smuggling operation. It was phenomenal.
So do you recall when you got there and when you left, was it a couple weeks, a couple months? How long were you guys working on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, like the whole operation took about 3.5 weeks, but like I said, one thing led to another. So once we started engaging with the Ukrainian government, providing training to some of their units, we got involved with some of their operations they were asking us to consult on. And then some of them were asking, like, can you get us equipment and gear? So we had to go through this Department of State process to allow us to export these things, because they sort of control that. And then I had another SEAL friend of mine come to Warsaw, because he's an ammunition dealer. And because at the time, they're just asking for everything. They needed everything to fight the war. So we started figuring out ways to export some of that. That was also, I'm super thankful for Drago, because I was in a hotel in downtown Warsaw, and I had to travel to about 7 or 8 blocks to visit my buddy that was doing the ammo. And I did it by Lime scooter. And I would finish sort of my work at like 12 at night, 1 in the morning, and I would go visit him. And when I'd go visit him in the lobby of his hotel, he would sort of brief me like, hey, I think this guy over here is like, he's just sort of been here the whole time I am, keeps looking over, like we're being watched. I'm like, all right, whatever. And after about like 5 nights of that, I walked out after our meeting, and there was this like brand new, like super cool looking Lime scooter right outside the door. And I was like, well, that's weird, because you're supposed to park them off the sidewalk. They won't let you park them unless you're in the right area.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, somebody parked that there. Like, I don't even know how they got away with leaving it, or they're still being charged.
Right.
So I pull up my line map, and in all of Warsaw, I zoomed out because I was like, what the fuck's going on? There's one scooter available to me. I'm like, what? And it was that one. So I'm like, all right. I'm like, someone's doing this. Someone's messing with me. So I'm like, I'm just going to go to the next one. So I walked down a block. I found another one. I put my phone up to it, scanned the QR code. And it said, sorry, this one's under maintenance. I'm like, what the heck are they doing? So I don't know how they did it. I don't know if they had figured out my phone. I'm sure my phone's easier to get into than the Lime system, or less risky, whatever. But I have a screenshot. I zoomed all the way out, and all of Warsaw, one Lime scooter available at that time. It's like nuts.
Yeah.
And then, like, the next morning, like, I did another screenshot because within like 1/2 a square block, there's like 100 of them because they're just all over in Warsaw. So somebody had gotten. So I asked Drago. I was like, "Hey, dude, like, what is this?" And he's like, "Let me ask." And he's like, "Oh no, you're all right. It's Polish intel. They just want to know what you're doing." I told them basically what we're doing. We're fine. I'm like, okay, good. Like, so I'm not gonna get radiated by some like freaking weird injection. Yeah. So that was kind of from that point for the next couple of months. It was like day to day.
For some reason, when you first said that, you pulled up the map and saw that there was only one, I thought for sure you were going to say like it was either going to end with like a tracking device, or there is like it was rigged with a bomb on it or something.
I had no idea what I still can't make sense of like, why did they want me on that one scooter?
Right.
It doesn't. Like they knew where I was going. If they had a half a lick of sense, they knew which hotel I stayed at. So I have no idea why they wanted me on that scooter. But I can't imagine, like, can you imagine if like someone riding a Lime scooter in Warsaw where there's now like 2 million refugees blows up? Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
So I have no idea. I like rack my brain, like, why did they want me on a specific scooter? It doesn't make any sense. But whatever.
Yeah, whatever. It will be the unsolved mystery.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they had some Bluetooth thing there. They're going to try to pull all the data from my phone or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, not to pivot too drastically, but one other thing that we talked about on the phone before today was that you did some executive protection for a while for some individuals with some money, and that you learned some things about just finances and money management, and just maybe some unexpected financial tips as we start wrapping up the episode. And I love that you already gave us some around just like leadership and breath work and visualization. Mm-hmm. And I love it when we have episodes with just a lot of nuggets where people can walk away from. But in recalling your time that you were doing, I don't know if you like the term executive production, it's just sort of what came to mind in the moment, but in the times that you were doing that, is there anything that you learned or picked up on that you've implemented into your own life and that you also teach or tell others now who are looking to be more financially savvy?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. It was just really cool because this individual taught like wealth building, and at the time he was somewhere net worth 600, 700 million. So the other sort of entourage that he had besides a security detail was, I didn't know this existed until then, but he had what's called a billionaire coach, right? So these people that get to that level, like what's the next thing? Well, billionaire. So if you talk to these guys, like the first 100,000's tough. Getting to 1 million, it's difficult, but it's the same stuff. To 10 million, same stuff. It's getting to 1 million. But once you go from like hundreds of millions to 1 billion, it's just a lot of work to multiply all of the money that you have to get to that point. From what I understand, I'm not a billionaire. But I got to spend time when this guy was on stage talking to his billionaire coach. So all these like weird, like sort of institutional lessons, and an interesting conversation I had with him. I'm like, well, what makes, so his background was he made a bunch of money in the .com rise in the early or late 90s, early 2000. And he exited just before the bubble burst because of a particular reason. And I asked him, I'm like, well, what makes companies fail? And he gave me this wise ass answer. He's like, well, negative cash flow. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm like, dude,
thanks, dude.
Everyone dies because their heart stops. Like, give me the goods, bro.
Right.
Like, and he's like, well, the most common thing is like corrupt leadership, like lack of integrity. So then he told me this story about like the board members and the people that were in like these companies in the .com era. Like they just had like really bad intentions, you know, they made quick wealth. And they didn't care about like the people that worked for them. They just cared about whatever they could do for the next, you know, they just had too much like rapid growth where they didn't have to build something and face day-to-day problems and fix those and create an organization with an organizational health based on like core ideologies. And that's why a lot of that stuff busted. And so I thought that was like super good insight. It's not like it's a secret, like you got to have with good leadership, but it does manifest from the top, right? So that's one of the things that he said. But a tip, so I guess, so something that the wealthy does, they create their own insurance companies and banks. Right. So if you have a brokerage account, you can wrap an insurance policy around it. It's like a whole life insurance policy. And if you wrap it, you protect it from a number of things. So for example, if anybody remembers O.J. Simpson getting sued after the murder trial, like he had to sell like some of his like paraphernalia and stuff to try to accommodate the numbers in the lawsuit, but they couldn't go after his 30 million that he had because it was in a brokerage account wrapped by an insurance policy. So so this is how protected these things are. Like a civil lawsuit for murder, like can't penetrate this thing. The IRS can penetrate it and divorce can get a part of it or whatever portion they determine is equitable. So that's a trick. So if you have a brokerage account or you want to start building one and if you have like rentals and someone gets bit by a dog from the neighbor and they want to sue you, if your brokerage account's just in a Chase account or whatever, it's susceptible to whatever they name as a number or the jury decides. If you have it wrapped in an insurance policy, they can't even touch it. And if you die, it doesn't see probate, much like a trust would, because it's just an insurance policy that pays the beneficiary. So your kids or whoever your beneficiary is won't pay taxes on it. If you have it in the right spot and it builds and builds and builds, it's an insurance policy. So when you're 65, you can just start stroking checks from it to yourself monthly, calling it a loan, quote, and it's a loan you don't have to pay back. So whatever like interest is compounded on its growth, you now pay from an insurance policy, no taxes. Crazy.
Yeah.
The wealthy have tricks.
Yes, they do. I remember you just reminded me of two clients back when I was in accounting. We had one guy who had hundreds of rental properties all over the U.S. and some overseas as well. And his tax return was so big. We had two people dedicated to it full-time year-round, one person part-time year-round, and then during tax season, January through April, they'd usually bring on about 3 of us to also help with it for about 20 hours a week because this thing was just such a freaking monster.
I'm sure, man.
And when he moved from California to Florida, just the tax savings alone, this man saved Millions.
Man.
I remember the year he moved. It was like, I think it was excess of 10 million, maybe a little bit more. It's like, why would you not move at that point? Like, The other one though was, when one of the partners brought me 10 years worth of tax returns, and he said, hey, we have to amend all of these and we have to include all this extra income. And as I'm adding all this income, mostly from Europe, I went to his office and I was just like, hey, I'm just super curious. Like, what are we doing here? Like, these people just forgot they had income from like in hundreds of thousands of dollars. It just slipped their mind. Like, what's the backstory here? And essentially what had happened was, it's a family who lived here in the U.S. Husband died much earlier than he should have, late 50s, I want to say. And as the wife is settling the affairs and getting the finances of the family moving forward,
imagine it's challenging.
It turns out that he has another wife.
Oh my God, are you serious?
Kids, business,
yes,
in Europe. And one of the ways he hid it from her was he never reported any of that income, which is very taxable. And so not only did the widow now have to get these returns amended, but she ended up owing the IRS like $3 to $4 million in taxes, late fees, and penalties, and it was just wild.
What a parting gift!
But it made me wonder what that marriage was like. Because like if she thought it was a happy marriage, and then she finds out this after he's in the grave, and now she has to clean up this whole mess while also reconciling, like, oh, he's married. There's another widow out there who's also like grieving, or like,
what about kids
and all the kids involved on both sides. And then I quit, and I never found out what happened because I got sick of accounting. Not because of that. That actually was one of the few things that kept me around.
That's interesting.
Like, right. That was not a day-to-day thing. That was a one-off for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, what's obviously none of us can tell the future, but what do you think is on the horizon for yourself?
Well, I can tell you this. It's going to all be good. It's going to all be good. Yeah, I mean, we're looking at helping out in Israel right now with Method Endeavors. We have training going on in LA. We are going to be advising on a movie with our good friend Anderson Silva. And it's going to be all good things, man.
There you go. We recorded last night, and the guest asked a little bit about who I was recording with next, and I told him from a very high level, 23 years in the Navy, a couple of other things, and he sort of asked me a vague question to ask you about what are your thoughts about what's going on overseas, specifically in Israel right now. I mean,
so, all right, well, I can give you some pretty fundamental things. First off, here's the shitty part. So Islam traces its roots to Ishmael, which is the son of Abraham, from what they call the maidservant. So you got Abraham living with his wife Sarah and this lady that takes care of the house and all this thing. And Sarah can't have babies. So somehow they concoct this thing like, well, you just sleep with her, and if you have a kid, then we'll have kids. Mm-hmm. So he does that, and Ishmael's born. And then Sarah gets pregnant, and Isaac is born. So Christianity traces its lineage through Isaac, Islam through Ishmael. And in Genesis, it says that these two will be at odds forever. So like if you think fundamentally from that point, like Islam and Christianity are in conflict. Mm-hmm. And so it is, right? So that's the fundamental part. But I think from my experience, terrorist groups and non-state actors like that, they find their ways to get their hands on weapons, right? Small arms, rockets, launchers, all these things. The challenge for them is it's always in pieces, right? So as they continue to try to accumulate this stuff, sometimes those pieces are separated intentionally because of the risk involved in transport. So if I'm going to have a missile and transport it, like I don't want the detonators and everything in there because you rattle it around and it goes off, right? Sometimes it's energy, so there's no batteries. Batteries are a different. So these guys have trouble acquiring like all the necessary means to put the whole piece together to execute whatever it is, to fire the gun, to launch the missile, to whatever. From what I understand, the money that was freed up recently with this negotiation with Iran, we freed up the $6 billion of frozen assets that they had. Iran being the known sponsor for Hamas that exists in Palestine, allowed them to acquire, some of these missing pieces. And that's why there's this barrage. And the other thing that that these Islamic extremist groups do really well is they wait for the right time. They're just patient. So I'm sure this plan was in place a long time ago. And I'm sad because the brutality, man, like I can understand, like, wanting sovereignty, but like, damn, I mean, they're dragging Holocaust survivors in wheelchairs and like torturing kids, and like it's not a just thing, I don't think. So now my perspective is admittedly removed from that kind of action for 10 years, so it's brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we will see where it goes, I suppose.
Yeah, I think I guess from what I see, there's a lot of global support for Israel right now. If it's good intentions or not, I think our administration is supporting it. So we'll see.
We will see. Yes, indeed. Anything else we should talk about this evening?
I don't know, man. I think we covered almost everything. I don't think
did.
I've ever gone through my life this thoroughly.
I appreciate it. It was a darn good episode. I enjoyed every second of it.
Awesome, dude.
I know knowing who some of the I don't know who all the listeners are, but I know who some of them are, and I know that they will thoroughly enjoy hearing this. So thank you so much for being genuine and transparent, and for everything that you shared. I appreciate it.
Well, I brought you a little gift.
Oh, heck yeah.
Well, no, it's not money.
I love
for the listeners. I pulled out a bunch of stuff out of my pocket, and
he pulled out a bunch of 20s.
20s came out. This is a coin. This is our Method Endeavors coin. There's a lot of like symbology here. So you got this Sykes dagger, which is like a special operations symbol. We have some logos. We have the Green Beret logo. This is the trident with the SEALs, the Marine Corps, and Ranger Battalion. And then we have our unofficial motto, which is "Violence is golden." And then our Latin saying. So yeah, Method Endeavors.
Thank you so
It's
much.
a coin.
I absolutely love this. What inspired you guys to make this?
Coins are a pretty common thing in the military. So it's like we kind of just had to have something.
Sure.
And so Devin, the founder, spent a lot of time designing it.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man.
What language is this again on the bottom?
Latin.
And what's the translation?
We create options.
We create options. This is beautiful. Thank you so much. I don't know where I'm going to put this yet. It's probably we're gonna if you're down, we're going to take a picture, and once I print the new set of guests and sort of redo this wall, I think it's just going to go right next to yours. At
Perfect,
least
man.
That'll be the current game plan for this guy.
Sweet,
and
dude.
guys, it's it's heavy too. Like
Yeah.
this isn't some cheap piece of plastic. Like this has got to be like a half a pound. I'm so bad.
I don't know what it is.
But as a guy who holds 2.5 pound weights in the gym every now and then, like this has got to be at least a pound because it's lighter than that, but it's not the same as one of those, and it's thick. It's gold. It's really cool. I'll put a picture up on the YouTube version if anyone wants to hop over to that and just take a look at it. But in the meantime, I'm assuming that anyone who stuck with us for the last 2 hours also enjoyed this episode. If you did, I would love for everything that Eric said, to whether it's someone who is in the military debating what they're going to do afterwards, or just anyone who would find the story, refreshing and encouraging and motivating. Eric did his part by showing up and telling his tale this evening. I did my part by hosting the podcast, but I would ask that you guys now do your part by going over to Spotify, dropping a 5-star review. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts this evening, go to the DSNSB homepage, scroll through about 10 or 12 episodes, and then you'll see 5 stars. Fill those out, give us a 5-star review, and if you run a write Eric a message, Apple Podcasts also allows you to write anything with that review. So if you want to send Eric a message or me a message, you can do that. And then on YouTube, the best and greatest way to support us is just by subscribing to the channel, and then that helps disseminate these episodes to more and more people with every subscriber. So I really appreciate your guys' help. In the meantime, have a healthy and happy Saturday night, and we will see you next week for another episode. Bye, everyone.